Good morning from Darug country, northwestern Sydney. Beautiful spring morning. Just acknowledging the thousands of years of care and custodianship and relationship with the land that I'm coming to you from this morning, and that I live on and that I work on. I'm just going to say a little bit about acknowledgement to country, because it's sort of a process that I'm immersed in at the moment with Dr. Maya Ward through the Melbourne Jung Society. She's running a workshop of sort of writing and claiming your own acknowledgement of country and relationship with country in there. So I'm in that process at the moment, very inspired by the women who collectively write in this book. Song Spirals, some of you might know it. Gaywee women from Yolngaloo country in northwest Arnhem Land. They write of country. Country is the way we mix and merge, the way we are different and yet become together, a part of one another. And they say that the singing of country, the song spirals, brings country and people into existence. So I think deeply about that and contemplate that when I'm looking at what do we mean by country, when we acknowledge country. Yeah, so, and it's all part, because acknowledging country is really like a poetic response to the land that underlies us all, that is the commonality to our humanity, that we are all part of, we are not separate from. So I'm thinking deeply about that, and it's relevant to poetry and to a poetic response to country. Yeah. So we're going to spend the next half an hour or so just having a little look through some poems that are really speaking to country, to the land, to nature, and speaking our being with that as a reciprocal process in our response. The word poesis is actually attributed to response, some sort of response from us, heart response often. And we're going to look at ways to sort of glean or garner or capture, harvest that. Particularly, we're going to have a focus on personally for this workshop. So you do that personally for yourself. And I know outdoor healthcare will have a lot of earth lovers and nature lovers there, and I know some of you to be that, as I am. And also you go further than just loving nature and loving country. You really love taking people out and facilitating that connection and that relationship, relationality with country. So first of all, this workshop could be used personally for your own expression and your own voice and your own response, your process of poesis, if you like words like that, like I do, ecopoesis. But also, this can be taken from your own experience of it and facilitated with the groups that you do. And I know lots of you run groups, climbing up mountains, lowering yourselves off cliffs, all sorts of extraordinary, adventurous things, and also more gentle experiences of walking mindfully and intentionally, quietly in nature, being still. And so the whole gamut of those experiences in nature. So this is, I'm hoping that this will be something that you can broaden, deepen, certainly use in your reflective process at the end of the day perhaps, or out in nature in the middle of it, on a big rock, and we'll come to that. We'll come to some rocks soon. Just stopping for a moment of stillness in it all, to just really mindfully become present and become aware of your beingness as nature, not separate from it. And those ecopoetic or ecopoesis moments, or whatever you call them, I'm sure you've got a word for them: ecstasy, epiphanies, sort of integral experience, a peak experience. I'm sure you've got your own beautiful stories of that to tell, and can bring out the poet in all of us, can open our hearts as a day in nature or on country, or some days, multiple days walking with a pack on your back through country. It can just be such moments, such ways of opening the heart. Yeah. So I'm hoping that it'll be twofold. Personally, you'll get something out of this and find, dig deeper, find your voice, find an expression, find a response that, may surprise you. But also, because of that experience, to be able to facilitate that with others, with groups, with the kids, with the young people, with the with whatever cohort that you get in nature with, and sort of have that joyous connection, reconciliation with as nature. So we're going to look at 4 poems, sort of from from the tradition of nature poetry, but I do argue that all poetry is nature poetry. And as I said in my intro, some of you may have caught, all of human emotion is within the scope of poetry, and humans are nature, so we are not separate. So yeah, you can call it nature poetry or just poetry, whatever. I think it's it sooner or later will come back to nature. Yeah. So I forget his name, a renowned linguist said, language was invented not for speaking about country, but speaking to country, or to nature, or to where you find yourself awake or landed in this life. It's a response to, it's an attempt, a very, very initial and primal attempt at a relationship and a reciprocity. And this is not new. This can be very ancient, coming from First Nations cultures across the world and their traditions, but it's just a really primal human experience to want to speak to or respond to or interact with nature. So poetry, there's a lot I could say here, but I'm just going to keep this brief. A couple of poets who I really, really love, or people who write about poetry, which would make them meta poets, wasn't it? Writing about writing makes them meta writers. Language was made for speaking to the earth. So Robert Bringhurst, who wrote a beautiful book called The Tree of Meaning, he, just a blue wren has caught my eye down there, a Jenny. Poetry is the thinking of things. He says the sun, the moon, the mountains, the rivers are all the writing of being, the literature of what is. We live in this library, he says. And we can choose to add or delete it, but poetry is there and it remains, and we can sort of borrow it or pull it out of the shelf, or we can just leave it there, but it remains. He also goes on to say, like science, poetry is a way of finding out. When you go to work for a poem, you give yourself away, leaving the self behind, getting involved in something larger. This is the beautiful one of the most beautiful facets or elements of poetry, is that we can come into our eco selves. We are invited out of the egocentric self, and it's a profound relief. Some of you will know that relief of oh, thank goodness it doesn't all hang on me. It doesn't all centre around me. Thank goodness, what a relief. So that's the invitation to the eco-self, which is beautiful, the beautiful invitation of nature itself to come into your ecocentricity and come out of that egocentricity that, particularly in the West, where we've kind of split away from ourselves as nature, and the healing work is to bring it back, to reconcile that back. Andre Lourdes, who wrote a manifesto in the 70s, a black female poet in America, she wrote, "Poetry is not a luxury." She said, and this is for those of you who think that poetry, is inconsequential and makes nothing happen. I think actually W.H. Auden said that, poetry makes nothing happen. It's a fairly famous tagline actually. Well, I disagree, with respect, W.H. I agree with Audrey, who said, poetry is the light within, it goes before our hopes and dreams for change and for action that leads to action. Gandhi was an avid reader of the poet Shelley. Now Gandhi, as you know, was successful in the non-violent revolution of independence from colonisation. He was an avid reader of poetry, so poetry can bring about peaceful revolutions. And we're looking at the internal, individual and collective revolutions and outdoor healthcare, adventure therapy. These things we're trying to create change. We're trying to create a catalyst for change and transformation. So poetry can make action happen, all right. So as part of a reflective or contemplative process of sort of deepening the intimacy with your experience in nature, say in a day when you've been out, caving, canyoning, I don't know, walking on country, whatever, bush tucker, exploration, however you go out in nature, mindful, walking, meditation. Poetry is a way of deepening and really extending that intimacy and that invitation and really going beyond to sort of a deep truth. It's very hard to tell a lie in poetry. I think I said that in my intro. So we want to get down to that and invite our participants to really deepen that experience and internalise it and bring out, draw out some of those qualities that are conducive to change and good change, transformational change, which often experiences in nature can be. And we want them, that's why we're here, because we know that they happen and they work. And so poetry is an intentional way of working with that. And the poet David White says that there is a memory in your body, and I mean, you don't have to be a poet to know that. The current research on trauma and memory and embodiment will tell us that we do store memory in our cells. So poetry and the arts and the creative process can be a way of jogging that memory to come home to yourself. So it's not about the memory of trauma so much. It's not about re-traumatizing. That's not what we're trying to do, but we are trying to process some of the more intense life experiences that may come up in nature sometimes, or that may be worked on gently in an unconscious way almost, or be processing in a safe way, in a where nature is the therapist holding that container to do the safe work of processing, bringing up when you're ready to process stuff. And we know that that this can happen quite naturally and organically and beautifully in nature, but we're wanting to jog the memory of the body to bring it home, and nature can do that as well. There's more that can be said there. I'm just sort of skimming over a bit of a surface, I suppose. And poetry and the arts and creative process can also stir the eco-imagination. Now, Theodore Roszak, who was a pioneer of eco-psychology, was really big on was a real advocate of stimulating the eco-imagination as ways to open the heart to experiences in nature, to open to the connection and deepen the connection with and as nature, but also to remember our primal, almost precognitive or eco-unconscious, which is our, really our birthright into the world, into the earth as nature. And this is healing. This is really healing, to bring this back and to bring a sense of this back and to stimulate the eco-imagination and the eco-unconscious and the memory in the body that remembers, the place in the body that knows that we are part of earth. We're not separate from it. So nature poetry can attune to the rhythms of our lives and into the parallel life that is going on in the cycles of nature. Our struggles, our trauma, our joys, all part of the transient experience of being human. Those are all experiences that pass through us, and we're constantly changing. And this is in line, I think, with the narrative approach that we are that we're storied human beings, and we're the best authors of our own story, and that we're many stories. We're not just one story, and we inhabit a story and live within that story and stories. And so being in nature can stimulate writing a new story, the change that is continually renewing in nature and the cycles of the seasons and the way it always is changing can align us in a sort of a beautifully unconscious way with that change, with that transformation. So, and it can call us to be into the present, you know, into a real presence and presencing is what I think I'm trying to say there. And this is a very mindful, gentle approach. And this is beautiful for anxiety. And I'm sure, like me, you find that lots of young adults and young people, if you work with them and children, are very highly anxious at the moment. It's also really good for their eco-anxiety. And when I say theirs, I speak collectively, ours. The collective anxiousness and an uncertainty around climate change and what's going to happen. And the power of nature and the fear of nature and the awe that goes, you know, to the real root of that word awe, which is fear of nature and what it's capable of, and we're seeing it all around. And so we're working to be mindful and present, and this can be a beautiful healing for anxiety, which can whip up into a real fear and a real phobia. And ecophobia is a thing, really, where we're focused on that alone and not the whole of our relationship with nature. It's a very fear-based thing, it can be, and lots of young people are really afraid of connecting deeply with nature, and not just young people, lots of people. So we're working to overcome some of this fear, to both recognise it, allow it, and work gently with it, with nature as a co-therapist in this space. And of course, I'm always indebted to the Dr. Gabriel Fletcher from Deakin, who spoke beautifully at the keynote at Stanwell Park a few years ago around working with nature. Country is not just a passive recipient of what we do in nature or on country. It's an active, sentient, sapient presence, and in fact more than that, it's co-therapist holding the therapeutic space for healing, for transformation. It's beautiful. Okay, probably enough from me about that. I'm wanting to share a poem from Bill Nayaji. He wrote a beautiful, well, he didn't, somebody's transcribed his words from the oral tradition, and it's just, in my view, pure poetry. Story about feeling, a most beautiful, extraordinary book from Magabala Books. All right, and I'm going to read, and I hope you can see that, because on the back of this is his poem. Now, I hope that's coming out the right way on your screen. I'm not good at screen sharing. Don't go around and put your head down. Listen carefully. Careful, and this spirit, he come in your feeling, and you will feel it. Anyone that. I feel it. My body same as you. I telling you this because the land for us never change around. Places for us, earth, for us, star, moon, tree, animal, no matter what that sort of animal, bird or snake, all that animal, same like us, our friend that. And that's from one of the many amazing sort of transcribing of conversations, really, that just come out in pure poetry to the land, to other human beings as part of country. It's so beautiful, and this beautiful comment he makes at the back right there, because you love it, this world. Yeah. So it's kind of almost a love story. It's, I don't need to do any commentary on it. It speaks for itself. So Bill Nayaji was known as Kakadu Man. He's passed now, but he was known as Kakadu Man, and he gifted a lot of the Kakadu lands to the government of the Northern Territory to caretake, as I understand it. So, beautiful. And it speaks respectfully, so very deeply respectfully to the land and to that tradition. Okay, there was another one. I was going to read you another one. This one is from, we'll read one more and then I'm going to invite you to write one. So this is a beautiful poem here. This is Rilke, German poet about 100 years ago. And Joanna Macy did a lot of translating her from the German. She is very inspired by Rilke, this beautiful one. Now I have to read it too here now. So I should have printed out another copy, but I didn't. So, I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world. I may not complete this last one, but I give myself to it. I circle around God, around that primordial tower. I've been circling for thousands of years and I still don't know. Am I a falcon, a storm, or a great song? Some of the best poets leave us with questions, and Rilke did that. In fact, he wrote a whole treatise on letters to a young poet who some of you might have read about questions. Be patient, the questions in your heart. Yes, and the beautiful use of the word, the concept of God, whatever you perceive God to be or not be, it's inclusive of any of those conceptions. I circle around God. I've been circling for thousands of years and I still don't know. Am I a falcon, a storm, or a great song? This poem is evoking the eco-self really beautifully as maybe a falcon, as maybe a storm, or a song, you know. Really invokes and invites the imagination and the eco-self. So from that you could, you know, invite a response poem from your participants or yourself, and I'm sure you may have. Some of you might be jotting on the back of an envelope or back of it, you know, something. The best poems sometimes are written on a napkin or the back of an envelope as a response to that. So, you know, writing from the perspective of an eagle or a song or a storm, and inviting someone to write, you know, a participant to write as a storm, or as an eagle, a falcon, or as a song, you know, and you know, bird song is just beautiful in its invitational eco-imagination that really is invoked and invited there to respond. To another tradition of poetry then, really simple, ultimately simple, Zen monk, Basho from the 16th century. Some of you will have heard of haiku. So this is quite a famous 3-line poem, very simple. The temple bell stops, but the sound keeps on coming out of the flowers. So you've got just 3 lines there. And some of you who are quite mathematical would notice you've got a pattern of 5, 7, 5 syllables. So you've got 5 syllables. The temple bell stops. Those of you who count on your fingers, there's 5. Then there's 7, and it brings it home with 5 again. So I'm just going to give you some time to write your own haiku. Some of you will have done this before. I hope you've got good memories of doing it. I hope it's not, oh God, school poetry was such a drag and, you know, I can't write poetry and my teacher was a drag or boring. But if it is that, and I have those poetry memories too, we can make new ones today. We can acknowledge the old memories and stories, and then we can make a new story today in the freedom of the narrative approach. We're free to make a new story, so I'm going to join you and support you in that. So I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 minutes of silence to just write a haiku. Now, before we do that, I'm just going to invite you to look out your window if you're inside, look out to a spot in nature, or if you can't do that for whatever reason, go in your mind's eye to a spot in nature that you love, that you might have been to this morning, or that you might be going to after this, or where you walk. Or you can use these beautiful flowers behind me, the Westringia, that the birds have just been absolutely nuts for lately. Flowers, the sound of the temple bell coming out of the flowers, it's a lovely poetic phrase. So just 3 lines, 5, 7, 5. No one's going to count them, by the way, but I am going to invite you to share them into the chat, just your 3-line haiku if you want to. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. So I'm always sure that some of you will need a bit more time, but I also do encourage you not to think too hard about this. Just let it come, just let whatever's there come, and don't analyse it, don't judge it, don't sort of edit it too much. These are best when they're just raw from the heart, just straight from there. And I'm hoping that some of you are popping these into the chat. They're always really fun to share. And it can be a really lovely thing to share it with a group and invite them, and you'll find most people will really want to read them out, especially kids when they're doing them, or young people. You can remind them of Ricky Baker, if you like, from Hunt from the Wilder People. He wrote some amazing haikus, and the real art of brevity, of simplicity, of it's very zen, it's very presence and mindful. And Ricky Baker was really good at them. So if you've got any young boys who just say, "Oh, poetry's for sissies," or poetry's for wimps, you can tell them about Ricky Baker and how I don't think he's a wimp. I think he was a really courageous young man, and he wrote amazing haiku. So that may or may not be relevant to you and your world and who you work with, but yeah, really hoping some of those haikus are coming into the chat, and a really beautiful haiku that really brings it home in the last line will kind of help you to breathe out, and you'll find yourself maybe just, what a lovely offering, what a lovely, simple, why didn't I see that before? It can help you see things in just that little bit of a different light, and the last line, those last 5 syllables can bring it home. So I encourage you to keep putting those into the chat and sharing those, and I'm hoping that they're bringing a smile to your eco self. So I did promise one of mine, and this is from my book Nature Heals. It's not a poetry book. I've brought out a collection of poetry just this year, but in Nature Heals I've got quite a few poems. This is a photo poem, and I'll just read it. I'm hoping you can see it, that's all. Called Blue. It's called Blue. Ardour bent each piece of grass tight, erecting your bower the artistry of optimism, more considered than Pollock's blue poles with cobalt and viridian feathers gleaned and fussed. Sapphire bottle tops flown in with a solitary red one, because temptation is scarlet. Would that I were your lady, bowerbird, beguiled, such allurements beholden, tangled in cerulean intrigue, I would utterly be lured down your tunnel of love. I don't know, some of you will know there's bowerbirds going in a frenzy around us at the moment. I just do not know where they're building their nest, but I will find it out. But they are behaving very heightened, and I know that they're mating. And this is a true story, and I have a photo to back it up. But once I found a bowerbird nest in the bush that had a blue metallic condom wrapper opened in his bower. So that's just a little bit of that's a true story. It was just, it had to be seen to be believed, didn't it? It was just amazing. So that's what bowerbirds are capable of. So photo poems are really good with kids, but also adults, you know. Get them to take photos in nature, invite them to bring their photos, and just write a few couple of lines with each photo, and that the photo and the art of that and the presence and the capturing can really bring out their poetic selves and imaginations, their eco-imaginations as well. And further their experience, you know, maybe you saw a bowerbird nest in the bush or stumbled across other birds' nests, I don't know, maybe, you know, whatever you saw out there, whatever moved them, whatever they remember, you know, they could do some photo poetry around that. And that photo poetry is really beautiful for sharing online. I know young people love to do that, sharing some of their eco selves online. So look, that's just a really brief and gentle introduction into sort of eco poetry and how it can reconcile us with our nature selves, bring us into stimulate our eco-imaginations, bring us into our eco-centric ways of being, deepen our intimacy with being on country and being in nature, and the change, the invitation to change and transformation that it brings. And poetry is a way of working intentionally with that and deepening the reflective process and really bringing it home and deep into our bodies, embodying it and knowing it. And yeah, I hope, you know, I'm sure some of you already work with beautiful poetry. Just to finish, I'm going to give you a list of other poems that can be really powerful and themes that can be really powerful working with young people. And I'm happy to put this in, I've got this in a document if you want to send me an email, kvaliantis@gmail.com. I will happily share these with you. But Charles Simic wrote a poem called Stone, and it invites you to go inside and become a stone. And, you know, you can bring some stones in. Here's a beautiful piece of sandstone. It's a beautiful painted stone that somebody's done. You know, I'm sure you come across lots of different stones. Stones are, well, they're lots of things. But this poem invites you to go inside and become a stone. And ultimately, it's asking you to get in touch with your strength. And I know that will be your inner strength, will be an amazing theme to work with lots of your participants as a therapeutic and healing space. There's another poem called The Explorer by David Ignato. It's a poem about an encounter with a dangerous mountain, and the person is wondering whether or not they should climb it and whether or not they can climb it. And there's a line in there, climb and die or climb and live. You know, and it's really about pushing yourself and coming to the edges of your fear, and it's all about fear and courage, embracing your fear and being courageous anyway. It's an amazing poem. It talks about the exaltation and triumph of climbing and living, climbing to live. So, you know, this amazing encounter with a mountain that some of your adventure therapy programs, I'm sure, would really resonate with. But other poets that talk, nature sort of poets, Mary Oliver, I could talk all day about her, I won't, it's okay. But you know her poem, The Summer's Day. She's lying in the grass talking to grasshoppers, and she ends it with that incredible question that I'm sure most of you will know. What will you do with this one wild and precious life? An amazing accolade to Mary Oliver. That poem is scrolled on the wall of McDonald's in Sutton Forest. So as you're going down the Hume Highway from Sydney south, you know, towards Bungonia or Marulan, the Sutton Forest McDonald's has got that poem written around the tables and chairs. So what will you do? What indeed will you do with your one wild and precious life? And there's quite a list more of sort of poems that can be really amazing to work with, so I'm happy to share that with you. Yeah. Okay, we're looking at nearly 35 minutes. I think I'm probably well into my time. It's been lovely to introduce this to you, and when we can do some of this face-to-face will be wonderful too, won't it? All right. Thank you all.